For thousands of years, there has been a short passage in the Bible that has caused curiosity, debate, and mystery among readers, historians, and believers all over the world. It appears in the book of Genesis, right before one of the most dramatic events in the entire biblical narrative, the flood. At that moment, the human population was growing rapidly. Families were multiplying, communities were forming, and the world seemed to be expanding into a new stage of human history. But in the middle of that growth, the biblical text suddenly introduces a strange detail that has fascinated readers for centuries. The text explains that when humanity began to multiply on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves from any they chose. And immediately after this statement, the narrative adds a line that raises even more questions. It says that in those days, there were giants on the earth. These giants are called by a Hebrew name that has become famous among readers of the Bible: Nephilim. And the text does not simply say that they existed in that moment. It adds something that makes the mystery even deeper. It says that these giants existed in those days, and also afterward. For many people, this raises an immediate question. Who exactly were these giants that the Bible mentions so briefly, yet so dramatically? Were they simply very tall warriors, men with unusual physical strength and influence? Or was the ancient text hinting at something more complex and mysterious about the ancient world before the flood? For centuries, scholars have proposed different explanations. Some believe that the phrase "sons of God" refers to heavenly beings, angels who abandoned their place and interacted with humanity. Others believe the expression refers to powerful rulers or kings who used their authority to take women whenever they wished, creating a culture dominated by power and violence. There are also interpreters who think the text describes two human lineages that eventually mixed together, one that had remained faithful to God, and another that had moved away from him. But regardless of which interpretation someone prefers, one element remains striking: the presence of giants. The text says that these figures were known as heroes of ancient times, men of renown. That phrase alone suggests that they were widely known and perhaps even admired in their world. Now think about this for a moment. Throughout history, many cultures have told stories about powerful heroes and legendary warriors. But the biblical narrative places these figures in a very specific moment of history, right before the flood. That detail makes many readers wonder if the text is suggesting that something unusual was happening in the world at that time. Perhaps these men represented more than just physical size. Perhaps they represented a culture where power, strength, and dominance had become the highest values. The text of Genesis continues by describing the moral condition of the world during that period. It says that the wickedness of humanity had become great, and that every intention of the thoughts of the human heart was continually evil. This description reveals that the world before the flood was not simply a society with a few problems. According to the narrative, it had reached a point where violence and corruption had spread everywhere. Imagine living in such a world. A world where the strongest individuals dominate the weak. A world where reputation and power determine who is respected. In such a society, figures described as giants might not only represent physical strength, but also influence and authority. They could have been leaders whose actions shaped entire communities. And yet, in the middle of this violent and chaotic world, the biblical story introduces a completely different kind of person: a man named Noah. The Bible describes Noah as righteous in his generation, a man who walked with God, while the rest of the world followed a different path. This contrast is one of the most powerful elements in the narrative. On one side, we see a society filled with powerful figures, famous warriors, and men of renown. On the other side stands one man who simply remains faithful. And that faithfulness leads to one of the most extraordinary commands ever recorded in Scripture. God tells Noah to build an ark, a massive vessel designed to survive a flood unlike anything the world had ever seen. Imagine how strange this must have appeared to the people around him. While society admired strength and fame, Noah spent his time building a ship for an event that had never happened before. People may have laughed at him, or thought that his actions were meaningless. But the story suggests something important. True significance does not always look impressive in the moment. Sometimes faithfulness appears quiet and unnoticed compared to the loud influence of powerful individuals. Yet, in the biblical narrative, it is Noah, not the giants, who becomes central to the future of humanity. But the mystery of the giants remains. Because the text does not only mention them before the flood, it says they existed in those days and afterward. Centuries after the flood, the people of Israel approached the land of Canaan after their long journey through the wilderness. Moses sent 12 spies into the land to explore it and report what they saw. When the spies returned, they described a land filled with fertile fields and strong cities. But their report quickly shifted from excitement to fear. They said that the inhabitants of the land were powerful, and that some of them were giants, descendants of Enoch. And then they added something revealing about their own reaction. They said that in comparison to these men, they felt like grasshoppers. This statement reveals how deeply their fear affected them. Fear has a way of changing perception. When people feel overwhelmed, they begin to see themselves as smaller and weaker than they truly are. But among the 12 spies, there were 2 men who saw the situation differently. Their names were Joshua and Caleb. While the others focused on the size of the enemies, Joshua and Caleb reminded the people that God had promised them the land. They believed that with God's help, the challenge could be overcome. This moment highlights an important theme that appears again and again. Throughout the Bible, the greatest battles are often fought within the human heart. The presence of giants in the land was real, but the question was whether the people would allow fear to control their decisions. And this leads to a question worth reflecting on today. When you face a challenge that appears larger than you expected, what is your first reaction? Do you focus on the size of the problem, or on the possibility that there might be a way forward? Write your thoughts in the comments, because many people find that these ancient stories mirror experiences in their own lives. But the story of giants in the Bible does not end here. And the next chapter of this mystery introduces one of the most famous confrontations ever recorded in ancient history. And it is exactly at this moment in the biblical story that the theme of giants becomes even more fascinating. Because as the narrative continues, we begin to see that these intimidating figures appear again and again at key turning points in the history of God's people, almost as if every generation must face something that seems larger than life. After the spies returned from exploring the land of Canaan, fear spread quickly among the people of Israel. The majority of the spies insisted that conquering the land was impossible. They described powerful cities, strong warriors and giants who seemed unbeatable. Their words created panic in the camp. The people began to imagine defeat before the battle had even begun. Yet 2 voices refused to join the fear. Joshua and Caleb stood before the people and spoke with confidence. They reminded everyone that the land had been promised by God, and that no enemy, no matter how large, could overcome the power of the one who had already delivered them from slavery in Egypt. This moment reveals something profound about human nature. When people focus only on the size of an obstacle, fear grows stronger. But when they remember their purpose and their faith, the same obstacle begins to look different. Perhaps you have experienced something similar in your own life. There are moments when a challenge appears enormous at first, and the natural reaction is to step back or even give up before trying. But sometimes perspective changes everything. The story of the spies shows how 2 groups of people can look at the same situation and reach completely different conclusions. 10 men saw giants and believed defeat was certain. 2 men saw the same giants but believed victory was possible. This raises an important question for anyone listening to this story today. When you encounter a problem that seems overwhelming, which voice do you listen to first? The voice of fear or the voice that encourages you to move forward despite uncertainty? Write your answer in the comments, because many people find that reflecting on these questions helps them recognize how they respond to challenges. But the narrative of giants in the Bible moves forward to an even more dramatic scene, one that has captured the imagination of readers for generations. Many years after the events in the wilderness, the armies of Israel faced a powerful enemy known as the Philistines. The 2 armies gathered on opposite sides of a valley called Elah. For days, the soldiers stood facing one another, waiting for the battle to begin. Yet, instead of an immediate clash of armies, a single warrior stepped forward from the Philistine side. His name was Goliath. The Bible describes him as a giant, a seasoned fighter, covered in heavy armor, and carrying weapons that reflected his experience and strength. His spear alone was compared to the beam used by a weaver, suggesting a size and weight that would intimidate any opponent. Every day he approached the battlefield and shouted a challenge to the army of Israel. Instead of sending entire armies into combat, he demanded that a single warrior face him. If that warrior defeated him, the Philistines would surrender. If he won, Israel would become their servants. For 40 days, this challenge echoed across the valley. 40 days of waiting. 40 days of tension. 40 days in which no soldier from Israel stepped forward. Imagine standing among those soldiers and seeing this enormous warrior walking toward you each day. The sound of his voice echoing through the valley. The confidence in his movements. Fear can spread quickly in such moments. Even trained warriors can hesitate when they believe their opponent is unstoppable. But then an unexpected person arrives at the battlefield. A young shepherd named David. David was not part of the army. He had come simply to deliver food to his brothers and bring news back to his father. Yet when he heard Goliath's challenge, his reaction was very different from the reaction of the soldiers around him. While everyone else focused on the size of the giant, David focused on something else entirely. He saw the situation as an insult against the God of Israel. This difference in perspective changed everything. Instead of being intimidated by the size of the enemy, David believed that the battle belonged to God. When King Saul offered him armor for protection, David declined because he was not used to fighting that way. Instead, he took a simple shepherd's weapon, a sling, and selected 5 smooth stones from a nearby stream. To many observers, the scene must have seemed absurd. A young shepherd with a sling, walking toward a giant warrior covered in armor. But the outcome of the confrontation became one of the most memorable moments in the entire biblical story. As Goliath approached with confidence, David launched a single stone from his sling. The stone struck the giant in the forehead, and he fell to the ground. In that instant, the impossible happened. The warrior who had terrified an entire army was defeated by someone who trusted in something greater than physical strength. This moment reveals a powerful pattern that runs throughout the biblical narrative. Giants often appear as symbols of overwhelming obstacles, yet they are never the final authority in the story. Time after time, the narrative shows that the size of the enemy does not determine the outcome of the battle. Faith, courage, and trust can transform situations that once seemed impossible. But the mystery surrounding giants still invites deeper reflection. When we remember the brief statement in Genesis about the Nephilim existing before the flood and also afterward, it becomes clear why readers throughout history have continued to ask questions. Were the giants in later biblical stories connected to those ancient figures mentioned in Genesis? Or were they simply powerful warriors whose reputation made them seem larger than life? Scholars have explored many possibilities. Some believe that the term giant was used broadly to describe people of unusual size or strength. Others suggest that these stories reflect ancient memories of powerful tribes known for their height and military skill. And there are those who believe the Bible intentionally preserves a sense of mystery about these figures, reminding readers that the ancient world was filled with events and experiences that are difficult for modern readers to fully understand. Yet regardless of how someone interprets these details, the central message of the narrative remains clear. Giants in the biblical story represent challenges that appear overwhelming at first glance. They represent moments when fear threatens to control decisions. But they also reveal how courage and faith can shift the direction of history. Think about how often the phrase giant is used, even today, when describing problems or obstacles. People talk about facing giants in business, in relationships, in personal struggles, or in moments of uncertainty. The language itself shows how powerful the image of a giant can be. It represents something that stands in the way of progress, something that looks too big to overcome. Yet the biblical narrative consistently shows that such obstacles do not define the future. Instead, they become opportunities for courage to appear in unexpected places. This is why the story of David and Goliath has remained influential for thousands of years. It is not simply a story about a physical battle. It is a reminder that strength does not always come from size, and that determination combined with faith can defeat what once seemed impossible. Now, think about your own life for a moment. Everyone eventually encounters a situation that feels like facing a giant. It might be a difficult decision, a personal struggle, a financial challenge, or a moment when confidence feels small compared to the size of the problem. When that happens, what do you usually focus on first? Do you see the giant standing in front of you? Or do you search for the opportunity hidden within the challenge? Write one word in the comments that describes the biggest obstacle you have faced recently. Many people discover that sharing their experiences encourages others who might be facing similar situations. And if this story about the giants of the Bible made you curious about the mysteries hidden in ancient texts, then stay connected with this channel, because there are many other passages in Scripture that still hold fascinating questions waiting to be explored. And the next story we uncover might reveal another surprising detail about the world described in the Bible and the lessons it still offers to people today.